We take the belief in the position that we actually don't own anything, that we're generational stewards. And if you take a lens of stewardship, you begin to think about the implications of the choices you make 5, 6, 7 generations ahead of you. It's some of the learnings we've garnered from our Indigenous elders and sort of the incredible insights that they've shared. It's looking to the past in order to sort of get an understanding of the future. We just recognize that we are responsible for those choices far beyond what is going to implicate us today. But we need to recognize that it is not ours to take when it's an asset of a future generation.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by Mazyar Mortazavi, CEO of TAS Impact. Based in Toronto, TAS is proving that regenerative development can play a vital role in creating healthy, equitable, and connected communities in dense urban environments. Welcome back to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, everybody. It is our first episode of 2025 after a refreshing winter break. I cannot be more excited to be back behind the microphone, connecting with visionaries and leaders who are reshaping how we inhabit the planet. We have an incredible lineup of guests this year that you won't want to miss. If you're new to the show, be sure to hit subscribe to stay updated on future episodes. And if you're a returning listener, I truly appreciate your support. A quick rating and review is one of the best ways to give back and keep these conversations going. Today's episode is like having a front row seat at a masterclass in regenerative development. Mazyar Mortazavi, CEO of TAS Impact, joins us to share how his Toronto-based firm is redefining urban development by weaving community, sustainability, and impact into every project. Mazyar's journey is deeply personal. The organization's strategic plan follows his old university thesis on anti-displacement strategies. His interest in this was shaped by growing up in an immigrant family and witnessing firsthand the effects of gentrification in Canada's largest city. Under his leadership, TAS has evolved as a custom home builder into a trailblazing urban development company that is creating places harnessing community engagement processes most firms can't even dare to imagine. While TAS doesn't explicitly use the language of regeneration, their work embodies its principles, proving that the process and approach are what truly shape remarkable community-driven places. Okay, let's dive in. Mazyar, I took a break from the podcast for the last month, and it was so nice to actually have a lot of enthusiasm to research coming onto this podcast. And I've just got to say, it was extremely impressive to even look through TAS's impact reports and just see glimpses from afar of what your company has been up to. And I think the best way that where my curiosity really leads me is like, we can't even start the story with you. And I know that it's not exactly your story to tell, but I'm curious where you naturally would begin this journey with your parents involved in creating TAS as a custom home real estate investment company. Where do you think the best place to pick that up is?
The origin story of sort of an immigrant family coming to Canada as sort of a new chapter for a family who was sort of leaving, where families originally from Iran, leaving Iran at a time when it had just started a war, and wanting to set new foundations. And to me, the company was founded by my parents in the early 80s as a attempt to sort of begin a life in a new country. And the start of that was sort of setting roots, building homes. And the idea of building homes continues to be central to who we are as an organization today. And their commitment was within the realms of their capabilities and resources at the time. They started as sort of spec home builders in the 80s, as both trained architects and a passion for design that evolved into a custom home building business. It was camp for me in the summer times as my friends went off to day camp. I went to construction sites, and the business was run out of the basement of the family home for quite some time. That idea of sort of building homes, quality, a commitment around sort of a set of values is something that has instilled itself into who we are as an organization today, both as it relates to the commitment to building homes, but driving a business focused on a set of values that align to the outcomes we generate and what we sort of create. There's elements of sort of creative thought that goes into not just buildings, but into sort of how we solve for problems, a creative thinking and a creative thought process around sort of the breadth of what we do. And particularly given sort of the economic times, sort of a creative outset on sort of how do we cross the challenges that sort of the market is facing to where we want to go as an organization that continues to be deeply committed to building our cities as we use real estate as a tool to do so.
When you talk about homes, I think that is a marked difference between, I guess, profit-seeking development companies that have created this entity of they want to go build units, and they can even go create a mission statement and have values. But I'm curious what that process was like as a family business and as a youngster on the periphery looking at that and connecting that. Was it something that was expected of you to step into leadership, or what was that career path like for you?
I don't think there were ever stated corporate values, but there were family values. And I think this is how you bridge between sort of a family business into a corporate business, is that the values are often sort of the values espoused by the family behind the business. And so it would, definitely started as that. I studied architecture. I went through architecture school at University of Waterloo, which had a co-op program. I did my co-op work terms at the family business. It was a natural progression as opposed to sort of a career path. I'd always wanted to be a painter. I wanted to go into fine arts. My parents' sort of solution to that was going into architecture, so I'd have a professional background at least to sort of fall back on. I'm still, I think, in pursuit of wanting to go into painting, so I think I'll get there someday. But it was a natural evolution of it. And I would sort of say what was founded as a set of family values evolved and expanded into a set of corporate principles that went far beyond sort of this idea of a business model alone, or the business model became the values. The business as it is today is a manifestation of a master's thesis that I did, which was focused on how to preserve cultural character under the force of gentrification. And really the last 25 years for me has been taking that master's thesis and bringing it to life, but also wanting to be very clear and articulate around the fact that, we are profit focused, and there's nothing wrong about being profit focused. And I think that is a misnomer for a lot of people who get into this type of work, and or for us in particular, is that, financial resiliency is the foundation. And we're not apologetic about the fact that we're profit focused and profit driven. We just feel that it's not the profit that motivates us alone. It's one of the drivers, but the fact that what we've been able to do is to broaden the profit outcomes alongside of the sort of the impact outcomes that have been critical for us. And so we set out to measure a broader set of outcomes as opposed to profit alone.
I want to talk about that master's thesis. Do you ever go and have you published that on the website? Is that something that you reflect back on and look at it as like, wow, we built this very similar to the vision 24 years ago?
So I think the master's thesis I think of it as a framework of ideas around sort of the core principles of understanding that a city is made up of its parts, and those parts are of the people. And that continues to inform sort of how we think about our projects as it relates to the breadth of engagement that we do, the outcomes that we're looking to drive. I think there's, ideas are catalytic, and I think a master's thesis and what I did was sort of catalytic to get us to here. And there's a lot of strings that we continue to draw on as it relates to that very early work. I'm not so sure whether if you were to read that thesis today and look at the business, whether it's sort of fully obvious and or it becomes more referential. And so probably it plays more of a referential piece. But, the thesis was anchored around fractal theories, and I think fractal theory continues to play a very important role in the way that we think, predicated on the fact that, if you look at nature and if you look at sort of plants, for example, the construct of organic matter tends to be in a fractal sense, and that, you don't necessarily see the apparent rigid structure at the molecular level, but it's that molecular level structuring that allows for the organic nature of things. And it sort of informs very much the way we think about the business, in that you need to have very strong foundational organizations in place in order to allow for innovation, for creativity, for the unexpected. We don't believe in chaos theory driving the unexpected. We actually think it's a very rigorous approach towards systems-based thinking that actually helps to unlock for the possibilities of innovation and creativity. And it was very much anchored around the thesis that I did in terms of exploring the city through sort of fractal components and looking at sort of how, you go back to the bazaars of the East, or if you translate that into the medieval town, where, it was all organic based growth, but it was actually tied to sort of fundamental needs and necessities. And there's an underlying structure that then allowed the social frameworks to evolve around them. And so again, that's how that sort of continues to inform the work that we do, that you do need sort of the core structures to allow for the fluidity of social constructs that are always evolving with time.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like?
If you look at a market, a market has this sort of sense of chaos around it. But if you look at the structure, that there's often sort of stalls that are set up, and there's a structure around the stalls, and it typically flows from sort of one type of segment of a market to the next, to the next. That structure remains, but the needs of the community change the vendors who show up at the market. But you still have that underlying structure, right? A city operates in the same way. The built form, if a city is well organized, then what it does is that it allows for dynamic change. Right? The infrastructure remains relevant, but it allows for fluidity. We don't know what a generation from now will need, or 2 or 3 generations will need, but the decisions we make about how we place the bricks that we do is going to last far beyond the generation of the builders who build the buildings. And then recognizing that the resiliency of a city is actually in its diversity. And so how do we actually think of inclusionary cities or inclusive cities, not as altruistic serving constructs, but as resiliency towards financial efficiency and productivity? And if we begin to shift the construct of what we term as impact to actually be about resilience, recognizing that financial resiliency is paramount, then it's no longer an altruistic conversation. It's actually one of performance and efficiencies in the system. But the health of the system is in its diversity. If you want a city that continues to grow and perform, you need teachers, you need nurses, you need custodians. They need places to live. They need food. It extends into the cafes and the bars and the theaters and the music, right? Your artists need to be able to afford to live in that city, as do all of the various inputs. And so the idea of sort of not having an inclusionary frame of mind and pushing out your teachers and your nurses to live 2 hours outside of the realms of where they work actually creates sort of fragility when you, as a wealthy person, need to go to a hospital or need your child educated. You're compromising your own needs by disassociating the pieces of the whole. So it's an ecosystems-based thinking in the way that we are building our cities and thinking about how sort of the idea of inclusion and diversity is actually the underpinning of financial performance and resiliency.
I'm starting to understand the philosophical underpinnings of your thinking here. And I want to relate that back to the change that an organization has to take to go from something like custom home building into mixed use, understanding even the terminology of whole communities, where it looks like you've kind of over time broadly defined down impact into social connection, climate change, and broadening affordability. How do you start to make that pivot? It seems like you've got different architects, a different team, different investors, and you've really got to get sophisticated very quickly, I would imagine.
It's an evolution, and it's incremental and additive as opposed to something that was from day one. From day one, we've built luxury homes for very wealthy people. What if we were to apply design and the quality of design to homes for many people? And that was the thesis of the first condo building that we did. That applied to the second condo that we did. The third condo that we did was, at the forefront of what the emergence of LEED buildings, leadership in environmental energy. So we did the first LEED building. So then sustainability became sort of factored into the work that we were doing. And then as we began to sort of move forward, we had a significant setback at a loss that we had around one of our entitlements for one of our condo developments. And out of that, we took the lesson of listening. And what does engagement mean? How do we actually begin to not tell people, but actually learn by listening to people? From there, social engagement became really, really critical because we then began to realize that by actually listening, we would understand the fear in which people opposed development. So again, it was tied to recognizing that the resistance to development wasn't the development, it was resisting change because of the unknown factors of change. So we began to become much better listeners in the work that we did. Through that, opportunities presented themselves where we did a first partnership with the city of Toronto, building a public library at the base of one of our buildings because the community was wanting an expansion of an existing library. We wanted the conversion of an industrial building to mixed use. And by listening, we were able to propose to the city that we would put a library underneath the building. And the city then came on side to allow a conversion. And we took a $3 million asset and turned it into a $20 million asset and co-funded it, a new library with the city. And so it became a sustainable building that provided a public library. And then in those discussions, we were able to then expand it and provide 10 deeply affordable units to women who were coming out of battered homes through a shelter provider. And so all of a sudden, again, we were listening. We were listening and creating opportunities that created a win-win for everyone around the table. At the end of the day, our investors made 25% IRRs on their investments. The community got a new public library. We provided housing for women and single mothers who were in deep need. Again, everyone wins. It started by having a clear proposition of values that we wanted to use our projects to do more than just deliver profit. And over time, we've added on to that as we've understood better how we can do that through the strength of our partnerships and collaborations, but with a knack for listening better than before.
Was listening intuitive for you, or did you find that in another organization or mentor to really bring that into TAS?
I think listening is like yoga. It's a practice that evolves with practice. That's why it's called a practice, because I think the more you do it, the better you get. You sort of listen to business talks and leadership talk, and it's all about your business experiences and your MBA and this accreditation, that accreditation. But I think there's a significant parallel around personal growth. The layers we shed and the time we take around shedding our own personal layers and evolving as our sort of our inner self and our spiritual development and different terminology that's used for it. So I think listening is a practice, but it's a practice that's equal parts external and internal. External being the context in which we're positioned, internal being who we are as self and personal growth.
I get the feeling that the type of listening that you're talking about is different than the conventional real estate development industry, where I see a lot of leaders within that space. They'll maybe listen for an anchor tenant, or they're listening for emergent trends. But this seems to be deeper, that you're finding partnerships and collaborations within community organizations. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. What I'm really trying to understand is, how do you create methodology for deep listening of what a community's desires and needs are, and do that over and over and over again on successful projects?
I think I would start off by saying it's the tenants and the financial pieces as much as it is about the community and the partnership. So I see them all sort of bundled together as sort of a comprehensive whole. I think that it needs a different starting point. We lead with inquiry, and I think it's having an inquisitive mindset and setting out the core principles of measuring success beyond just profit, and measuring success with a multitude of outcomes. And when you have multiple outcomes, then you're listening for multiple inputs. And so for us, it's been a inquiry-led approach to real estate, where we are coming in and recognizing that we are far stronger as an organization when we get the inputs and the insights of the people who are actually on the ground, that the community knows their neighborhood much better, and that by getting those insights and those inputs, we can actually solve for many problems as opposed to engineer for the maximum amount of profit. We're looking to optimize, not maximize. And by optimizing, we believe that you get to a maximum, but it's a much broader set of outcomes that you're maximizing for and or optimizing for.
I need to think about that for a second. And where does that frame come from for you to optimize, not maximize? Like, can you give me an example as it relates to a project that would really demonstrate what you're talking about?
I talked about our Campbell project, which is where we put in the library, the social housing, the LEED certification, and the profit. Right? We optimize for all the various users as opposed to thinking about maximizing just for profit. Right? Think of optimization as an ecosystem as opposed to maximization in a silo. We believe that the strength of an ecosystem is far more resilient than the vulnerability of a silo that is dependent on itself.
Yeah, I love that. How did you start to coalesce the themes? It sounds like social connection came from listening, but then climate change also seems to be a big thrust within the design thinking as well as affordability. How did you start to put that pie together?
We take the belief in the position that we actually don't own anything, that we're generational stewards. And if you take a lens of stewardship, you begin to think about the implications of the choices you make 5, 6, 7 generations ahead of you. It's some of the learnings we've garnered from our Indigenous elders and sort of the incredible insights that they've shared. It's looking to the past in order to sort of get an understanding of the future. We just recognize that we are responsible for those choices far beyond what is going to implicate us today. But we need to recognize that it is not ours to take when it's an asset of a future generation. I go back to the difference between maximization and optimization. For us to maximize something today, it's at the expense of something. Whereas when you optimize, it's looking through that multi-generational lens and having regard for the choices you make today and the effect that they have into the future. We are seeing the repercussions of choices made in the past and how they affect us. And I think it's that willingness to be honest and transparent with ourselves about what's going on as we decide how we think about the future. At the heart of impact is transparency, and it is a fundamental necessity that if you want to achieve meaningful impact, it has to be done transparently because we actually don't have a lot of the answers. We can make a series of assumptions based on frameworks, but what we need to do is to be open to the multiple iterations that take place along a path or a journey. Real estate isn't you don't set up a factory and then pump out widgets. So many different factors change along the way, be it the economic conditions, be it policy and political changes that take place, consumer sentiments that change. So what you need to do is to develop a solid framework, be open to iterating and flexible to change.
Would you say this is a place-based, a Toronto-based development company? Or do you see it transcending the boundaries of the municipality?
I think that the process that we run and the frameworks that we establish don't have boundaries to them, yet the inputs and the insights are locally influenced for sure. And I would say that is as relevant if we build in an eastern community in Toronto versus a west neighborhood in Toronto, because those nuances are different, as it would be if we were to go to San Antonio and try to build there. At the heart of this is a human-centric approach, where part of the reason why we're so focused around engagement and partnership is because the insights that are garnered on the local will always differ from location to location. Policies will differ from location to location, but an inquiry-based approach helps to set a process in place that becomes agnostic to locale.
And what are you doing to evolve those partnerships? I mean, partnership is based in relationship. If you're going out and creating relationships with lots of different organizations, is there something that you're doing there in order to continue that deep listening? Is there a stable of organizations that you are partnering with more frequently for different aspects like affordable housing or something like that?
Again, I go back to the ecosystem model. A resilient ecosystem continues to build and expand. And so it's not a one and done, and every partnership is different. In Canada, there's been a very strong movement around reconciliation of our Indigenous history and the work that's being done around Indigenous reconciliation. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've gone through deep engagement with our Indigenous elders. Through that process, we've developed our reconciliation action plan, which sort of sets out how we, as a real estate company that is working on sort of lands that were historically Indigenous, how we are approaching these matters and how we're continuing to make sort of strides towards reconciliation framework. As a result of that, it's catalyzed a number of relationships and partnerships with different Indigenous groups around housing solutions within the Indigenous community. So, what began as an inquiry around how do we show up in a meaningful way with our Indigenous communities evolved into a reconciliation plan that is now evolving into a series of partnerships. Right? So I go back to the power and the strength of inquiry because you don't go in with an assumption of what you know, you're open to learning from what you don't. And that continues to inform the way that we approach our partnerships broadly without setting out a extraction-based model to take something, but to go and learn, and through those learnings, expanding where opportunities lie.
This episode is brought to you by Hamlet Capital, an exciting new endeavor I founded to invest in the future of thriving communities. If you're developing an agri-hood or conservation community, you know how complex these projects can be. From land acquisition and master planning to entitlements and securing investment capital, there's a fine line between a stalled-out vision and a thriving built reality. That's where Hamlet Capital comes in. We provide development, advisory, and investment solutions that align financial returns with environmental and social impact, helping bring projects to life in a way that's both financially viable and deeply impactful. So if you're working on a project and need guidance or capital, or if you're looking to invest at the intersection between real estate and regenerative agriculture, reach out and let's build something lasting together. Visit us at hamlet.capital. How have you seen the industry shift? Do you see other players that begin to do things differently? Like, what does that look like from, it seems like you are leading from this regenerative front. You have theories and systems and so much that I don't see in so many other development companies. And it makes me really curious to know how do other people, other contemporaries within your field, and you know, I realize it's not as simple as what do your competitors do, but do you see change taking place because of the things that you're doing with TAS?
And change is always taking place. I think we're far too small a player to have influence around what others do. So we continue doing what we do because we believe it's the right thing to do. If anyone ever asks, we share. We have our impact reports and we publish everything because to us, the work that we're leading, we're just a sort of a pin needle sort of relative to the scale of what needs to be done. But whatever we can share, we're happy to share it. If others want to sort of pick it up, great. And if there's things that others can share with us so we can learn, like willing and wanting on our part.
And I'm not trying to blow smoke your way, Mazyar, but I know a lot of developers that wouldn't even think what you're doing is possible. Like there's no mental framework there for them to even believe that you can go through this type of an approach to placemaking, develop partnerships at the community level, put in place programs like reconciliation action plans, and still run, private equity platforms where you're raising tens of millions of dollars worth of funds to place into development. To say that you don't know if you've made an impact, just it seems kind of outlandishly naive that you're like running at the front of the pack here.
I appreciate that, but I think it depends on what the measured outcomes are. If folks are focused on just making money, they're making more money than I am, right? I just don't think it's not a matter of we can't influence what happens, but it's a question of the why. If others are asking how they can use real estate as a tool to do meaningful things, yeah, we're a great precedent. But if the sole purpose is to maximize profitability, you can make more money than what we do. I think it's a value proposition. We're making great money. Our projects and our funds do really well. We do market-based returns. Are there people who make more money than we do? Sure. Have we made mistakes along the way and lost money? Sure. I think those are business cycles. I think that's inherent for everyone. But it starts with the why, right? We measure capital beyond just financial capital. We're measuring social capital. We're measuring environmental capital. We're measuring cultural capital. Those are important measures for us. If others want to measure more broadly, we think we have a sort of a set of tools that do it. If capital wants to invest with us that's concerned about that type of approach, we're a great platform to invest in. If capital is looking purely to maximize its returns, there's others that are more efficient at it than we are. I think it has to do with what is the measure of value. Capital is a measure of value. Where you align your capital is predicated on where you align your values. And for some people, their notion of giving and having value is to maximize their profit and give it through philanthropy. That's one model. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. We're doing it in a different way. Works for some, doesn't work for many. So
let's talk about who it does work for. Does that work for family offices, high net worth individuals? What is typically your investor base look like?
We have investors across the board. We have family office, high net worth institutions, foundations, non-for-profits. We have wonderful partnerships across number of institutional partners who are looking for impact allocations and wanting measured returns as it relates to their impact. They still want market returns, and we do that. We have non-for-profit foundations who are aligning their capital as part of their purpose-related investments, and sort of we solve for that. Family offices are the most values aligned because it's focused on the family's values, no different than what we talked earlier about family businesses and the alignment of those values. So I don't think there is one segment that we serve. I think we serve a broad sort of segment of investors. I would say our investors all look at our returns first and then our impact, and I think that's the right way to do it. So I don't think we're sort of segmented to a particular type of capital. It's aligning the values that capital has with what we do and how we're approaching
it. And if we could go under the hood just a little bit, do you create project-specific funds and syndicate individual projects, or do you typically create 5, 7, 10-year funds and try to allocate capital into a number of different projects?
We do both. We do single-purpose vehicles on an asset-by-asset basis, but we also do fund structures, sort of typical private equity fund structures.
And what type of lengths do you typically have on those funds?
Oh, they're typically 10-year funds.
Yeah, and the reason why I ask that is, whenever you start to really make deep inquiry into the regenerative movement, people just say, look, we need longer time horizons. But I would very much say what you're doing is regenerative development, and it's within a market cycle, a 10-year time frame that I think a lot of other investment vehicles and funds are going with. Do you have anything to say about that?
Now, our big focus right now is moving to evergreen structures because we actually believe that the ability to sustain the impact is through long-term ownership. And so we're actually now looking at a number of evergreen vehicles because we think that that's actually the most effective way of generating and creating long-term value.
How will that shift things for you? What does that shift the measure of a return away from something like an IRR to cash on cash, or what does that look like from the financial side of things?
Again, I think it depends on the investor. I think we're seeing that more and more investors who align with an impact proposition see these assets as generational assets as opposed to commodity assets. And so they're looking at sort of longer term, sort of stable income as opposed to multiples and IRRs. That to us is the right way to be looking at pure impact. Front-end development could be IRRs, long-term assets could be income-based. So you could have, we do have assets that are in the development phase. They'll generate a development return. And then with an evergreen vehicle, that can roll over, and investors who want to stay can stay, and those who want to exit can exit. So, I think we're looking at sort of solving for a few different outcomes. Financial outcomes that are prioritized through an IRR could be addressed through a development phase. Long-term income can be through an evergreen vehicle. So I think you can achieve both. And to us, the key thing is just the clarity for the investor in terms of them knowing what they're coming in for.
With that shift to an evergreen fund, is that liquid? I mean, can they come in and out anytime, or do you have to do that at set benchmarks?
Listen, it would have all of the, one of the things that we're adamant about is the structures we set up are market structures. You can't deviate market structures because the capital still has to work within a framework. And so, would we do an evergreen fund with traditional gates and all of that? Yes, that's what it would be. But we're not looking to reinvent the model because it just becomes too confusing for the capital.
Mazyar, if you had an inspired vision of the future here, I mean, you're second generation at the leadership helm. What does this look like? I mean, and you can take this anywhere. I mean, is there a third generation of leadership within the family? Are you trying to expand to new cities? What growth doesn't seem to be the right word, but where do you see the future lie?
Yeah, listen, I think that, I've always sort of said, I'm driven by scaling our impact. And in order to scale our impact, we need the capital to scale alongside with us. For us, our only limitation has been our scaling our capital, and that's sort of aligning with investors who want to come for the ride. What's our future look like? We're not prescriptive as to what the future looks like, but we continue to see the relevance of what we're doing and this potential to scale it in a very meaningful way. And so we remain open to that always. Do we find a platform that's very large in terms of its capital resources and says, we want to have a partner like you on side with us? You go keep doing what you do. Don't worry about the capital. Sure, that would be great. Do we find the right projects that sort of gives us the runway we want for the next 10 years? And that's what we do when we focus on. Sure, that's a possibility. We're going through some of the hardest economic periods as it relates to real estate in the last few decades. They're tough times. So we're focused on getting through tough times to be able to continue to do what we do. But the reason why we're in tough times is equally indicative of why the work we do is so relevant. We look at the economic disparities around us. We look at the financial pressures. We look at sort of the disparities across various segments of society. And at the end of the day, if we do not have resiliency in our communities, it's all for naught. And so the work that we're doing and the focus that we have on building generationally resilient cities is at the core of what we need the most today. And the financial challenges we face are indicative of that.
I so appreciate that perspective of resilience. It is such a marked difference between, I think, where a lot of impact-oriented funds are going around decarbonization or just siloing down into we need to do affordable housing, but really painting that whole picture and calling it, hey, this is what community resilience actually looks like, is just such a fresh breath of air. On a personal note, I am curious, who are those mentors that you're going to, either literary or in person? How do you keep your cup filled, Mazyar?
I play with my kids. They're a phenomenal source of inspiration. I've had a long-standing meditation practice and strong believer in sort of spirituality. I'm not religious, but believe in spiritual anchoring. And so there's so much to be learned from, whether it's the Greek philosophers or the Eastern philosophers. And I think the themes keep repeating themselves. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that standpoint. The Stoic teachings are so absolutely relevant in these times, as are the Buddhist teachings that are so absolutely relevant in these times. I think that at the end of the day, I always say it's never businesses doing businesses with businesses. It's people doing business with people. We're all fathers, sons, brothers, mothers, sisters, daughters. If we bring it down to the level of humanity, it's quite simple. And we are blocked by our fears and we are inspired by our souls. And so, how do we begin to create the space for inspiration and mitigate the fears? And I think that becomes our pathway forward.
I love that. To round this out, is there a favorite project that you have done that really stands out for you?
Sounds like you don't have children yet.
I have an 8-year-old.
I don't have it. Well, I don't have a favorite child. I say that jokingly, Neil, but no, listen, I think there's so much that we learn from each project. And our toughest projects have given us our greatest learnings, and our most incredible projects continue to inspire us to do what we do. And so I couldn't pick a favorite because we are continually inspired by the learnings we take from each and every project we do.
It's a very diplomatic answer. How about we shift into what is a project that is yet to be birthed into the world that you've been holding for a while?
We've got a number of projects on the go right now. We acquired the old abattoir in downtown Toronto. It's a 5-acre site. We're about to break ground on it in the next several months. 5 acres, completely landscaped, non-vehicular access, all pedestrian. Phenomenal location downtown Toronto, with its own geothermal plant and sort of so on. Like, it's just a phenomenal number of features and a lot of sort of inspiration coming through the indigenous work that we've done as it relates to the landscaping and the way that we're approaching that. So super excited about that project. We just got approvals on a tower inside a very, very special neighborhood in Toronto called the Annex, where in partnership with the Baptist Church, we're repurposing the old sanctuary of a church into a mixed community space and building a new residential tower there in a very, very special neighborhood. Really excited to see that come to be. We've been expanding our urban industrial strategy where we're taking large industrial spaces and subdividing them into multi-tenanted spaces. And part of that strategy, we're working with social enterprises as we seed neighborhoods with small enterprises that are doing everything from collecting fallen trees and repurposing them into furniture to working with local food suppliers and connecting them with food banks and creating food ecosystems. So, we have so many moving parts in our world, and I'm consistently inspired by them. So, I could keep going for a few hours just talking to you project by project. It's sort of what makes it hard to pick a favorite, just because of the way that each of them sort of comes to life. And those are all sort of the lessons from working within these communities and understanding what drives the local needs and how we can be a part of building the resiliency back into those communities.
That is a wrap on today's episode, but I don't want this to be a one-way conversation. I'd love to hear about the projects and ideas you're working on. The best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. Just search Neil Collins. And if my team at Hamlet Capital or Latitude Regenerative Real Estate can help bring your vision to life, whether it's buying or selling a home or developing a community integrated within a farm, do not hesitate to reach out. Let's build something meaningful together.